We have now reached the very end of John's Gospel, chapter 8, and we're looking at verse 48 to the end of the chapter, verse 59, and it's about what Jesus has said about himself. I read to you from verse 48. The Jews answered him, "Aren't we right in saying that you are a Samaritan and demon-possessed?" "I am not possessed by a demon," said Jesus, "but I honour my Father, and you dishonour me. I am not seeking glory for myself, but there is one who seeks it, and he is the judge. I tell you the truth, if a man keeps my word, he will never see death." At this the Jews exclaimed, "Now we know that you are demon-possessed. Abraham died, and so did the prophets. And yet you say that if a man keeps your word, he'll never taste death. Are you greater than our father Abraham? He died, and so did the prophets. So who do you think you are?" Jesus replied, "If I glorify myself, my glory means nothing. My Father, whom you claim as your God, is the one who glorifies me. And though you do not know him, I know him. If I said I did not, I would be a liar like you, but I do know him, and I keep his word. Your father, Abraham, rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. He saw it and was glad." "You are not even 50 years old," the Jews said to him, "and you have seen Abraham?" "I tell you the truth," Jesus answered. "Before Abraham was born, I am." At this point, they picked up stones to stone him, but Jesus hid himself, slipping away from the temple grounds. Much of Jesus' dialogues at this point is to establish a single, central truth, and that is who Jesus is. "Who do people say that I am?" he asked his disciples later on. "Some say you're a prophet, some say you're one of the patriarchs or whatever it may be, but some say you're the Son of God, Son of Man. And who do you say I am?" says Jesus. "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." This is the identity that he is seeking to establish in dialogue with the Jewish crowds. And his witnesses and his testimony and his truth and the power of what he says are presented in such a way as to be irrefutable. He silences opposition and critics, despite the fact that they might come back to him time and time again with different comments which are of no consequence. Let's see how it starts. They say to Jesus, "Aren't we right in saying that you are a Samaritan and demon-possessed?" Now, that could be merely an insult. That could be merely a jocular retort, "Aren't we saying that you're one of those stupid, foolish, errant people and demon-possessed on top of all of that? Doesn't that make sense?" Could have been just an insult. It could be because they knew that Jesus had spent some time in Samaria. He spent some time when he was at the woman with the well, and he stayed time there, and the crowds came out to see him, and he spent time with them. So people from Samaria may have said something about him, known him, that may have gone around in that kind of environment. It could simply be that this kind of an insult or this write-off, whatever it is, whatever the purpose of it, is simply to push Jesus to one side and say that we can ignore what you say. The Samaritans were known to have been outsiders, cultish, people who were doing things their own way, couldn't even worship God within the temple, but rather they worshipped God on a mountain. So they got that bit wrong. Even Jesus told them that they'd got that bit wrong. But still. So to say that he was a Samaritan was someone who's got the truth of God completely wrong. And to be demon-possessed, of course, well, that's a charge which was given to Jesus on many occasions, and he gave a stern rebuke to that, as we may see at a later time. But either way, to say that someone is demon-possessed is to say that what they're saying not only is true, is not true, but is ravingly evil and wrong and corrupt and bad and wicked beyond belief. Demon possession is something which is as if you're taken over by the devil himself. So it's this idea of being a liar, the father of lies. He's been speaking about the devil. And their retort, he's just accused them of being children of the devil. Their retort, their reply, their rejoinder is to hit back with accusations of their own. Whereas Jesus has said the truth about them and made a just judgment, they hurl this insult that you're the one whose father is the devil, you're the one who is demon-possessed, you're the one who's speaking like the devil himself, and some of the many demons that the devil possesses. So this demon possession thing hasn't just come out of nowhere. It's a response to Jesus' statement about them being the father, their father being Satan, the devil. So Jesus rebuffs that and answers that charge. He says, I am not possessed by a demon, said Jesus. And he recognizes immediately that that statement is not one which is designed to explain the truth, but rather to bring dishonor, to insult him, to cast names against him, it's a bit like these days calling someone a bigot or a racist. You just dismiss somebody by giving them a name to call them. Demon-possessed is probably equivalent of that day. So it's a term of contempt and dismissal. And Jesus said, I'm not possessed by a demon, but I honour my Father, and you dishonour me. Cuts right to the heart of what's going on here. By calling him demon-possessed, it's trying to cast a terminology which is to bring him down, like throwing things at him or dismissing him in some term. It's a dishonouring statement, and Jesus calls that out for what it is. He points out that I'm not seeking glory for myself, but there is one who seeks it, and he is the judge. And I tell you the truth, if a man keeps my word, he will never see death. So, again, the relationship between him and the Father, absolutely connected together, without any way in which you can separate the two. I don't act in such a way as to take glory from the Father. I act in such a way as to give glory to the Father. You, on the other hand, are dishonouring me, and therefore, by association, you're dishonouring God. Just confirms the diagnosis that Jesus made earlier on, that they are children of their father, the devil. Anyone who speaks in that kind of way, he's quite curt and sharp with them. And he is the judge. There is one who seeks it. So this is interesting. I am not seeking glory for myself, but there is one who seeks it, and he is the judge. Not seeking glory for himself means that I'm not come to aggrandize myself, to make myself big in your eyes. I come to make God big in your eyes. I come to show not my own glory and speak well of myself. I come to show the glory of God and to speak well of the Father. I come not to introduce myself and to praise myself and to praise the things that I do. I come instead to praise God the Father and the things that he does. Quite a different approach here. And so I'm not here trying to gain your praise, is the idea here. I'm not here trying to gain approval of you. And then he says this, what seems like a sharp disjunction here. I tell you the truth, if a man keeps my word, he will never see death. He's just spoken about the judge, and he's spoken about the idea of, therefore, the final day of judgment is implicit in that. The one who I give glory to is the one who will judge everything at the last day. And that judge will judge you as someone who is worthy of death. Why? Because you have rejected me. You've rejected my truth. You haven't put it into practice. You don't care about what I say. You're instead following rituals and half-truths and vaguenesses and distortions of truth, which the Jews and Pharisees have put forward, as many organised churches have degenerated in that kind of way. But I tell you the truth, if a man keeps my word, he will never see death. So that judgment is the kind of death that he's talking about here. The death which determines whether a person lives or dies, the judge himself being God the Father. And if you keep my word, you will never see death at that final judgment. And at this the Jews exclaimed, well, now we know that you're demon-possessed. Abraham died, and so did the prophets, and yet you see that if a man keeps your word, he never tastes death. There's a misunderstanding here again, and it's this misunderstanding of the gulf which is between the spiritual words of Jesus and the earthly, worldly understanding of those who listen to him. Jesus never said that they would never taste death. That was not what he was talking about. He's talking about death in the context of judgment. There are those who will rise to live and those who will rise to be condemned and thrown into the second death, into hell. Now, when he says, if you keep my word, you will never see death, in the context of this judge that he's spoken about, you can't separate those two. The final day of judgment, the declaration of life on death based upon what is found within you. If you keep my word, then you'll never see death at that final judgment. But these people misunderstood what he said and believed that he's talking about physical death rather than spiritual death. Remember, in nearly every instance, Jesus is speaking in spiritual terms about spiritual truths, and they're constantly being misinterpreted as being about earthly truths, about earthly things. So he's not talking about physical death here. He's talking about spiritual death. And you say that if a man keeps your word, he will never taste death? Are you greater than our father Abraham? Because he died, and so did the prophets. How can you say that you are going to save people from death? Are you going to save yourself from death? You know, even Abraham, who is much greater than you, by the way, Jesus, even he died. So you're talking rubbish, Jesus. That's what's happening here, and that's how we know you're rambling on as if possessed by a demon. The words that you say do not make any sense to us, and so they wouldn't if you understand spiritual things in earthly terms. So he died, and so did the prophets. So who do you think you are? It's a good question. Who do you think you are? In fact, it's probably the central question that Jesus is dealing with here. Because Jesus certainly, whatever we make of who he is ourselves, Jesus certainly saw himself as being greater than Abraham, greater than Moses, greater than everyone and anyone who had existed on this earth before. He certainly saw himself in that way, because he sees himself as being on the same level as God. That's something we can't get away from. No matter what you make of Jesus, no matter what you understand about him and his teachings, whatever it may be, if you understand what he's saying, he's putting himself on the same level as God. The Pharisees could see that. They called him a blasphemer. We'll see it even more powerfully in a moment or two as we get towards the end of this section. But one thing we must not mistake is we must not think that Jesus was being shy or coy about who he was here. He claimed the position of being equal with God, that his words were the words of God, that he was sent by God to do the work of God, to finish the work that God had started. So we must make no mistake about how Jesus sees himself here. Now, whether you accept that or whether you don't, that's up to you. But the point is that that's what he's claiming. Okay, that is the nature of the claim that Jesus makes. And so do you think you're greater than our father Abraham? The answer to that from Jesus is yes. And if you understood who I was, you would see it too. Do you think you are greater than the prophets? The answer from Jesus to that unspoken thing is yes. And if you understood what I'm saying, you'd see that was quite plainly. Who do you think you are? They said, and the answer to that is, I think that I was in the beginning with God and was God. That's who Jesus thinks he is. Jesus replied, if I glorify myself, my glory means nothing. Again, I'm not here to aggrandize myself. He's just made that statement previously. He's emphasizing it. I'm here to glorify God the Father. My Father, whom you claim as your God, is the one who glorifies me. In other words, he is the one who makes me big, large, who enlarges my reputation, who is glorying, the idea of the outshining of the radiance of the sun, or as the glory or the corona of the sun is the glory, the idea of what shines around Jesus in a metaphorical sense. It's the renown, the massive respect, the appreciation, indeed more than that, the very worship of Jesus, which this calls forth. And he says, thy Father, whom you claim as your God, is the one who glorifies me. In other words, he is the one who sets me forward to be worshipped and adored by those around. And though you do not know him, I know him. Echoes again, John 1:1, with God and was God. If I said I did not know him, I would be a liar like you. The idea of picking up what he said before, that Satan is your father. But I do know him, and I keep his word. In other words, I'm faithful to the word of God in a way which you have not been, in a way which the Jews have not been, in a way in which the truths of God have become distorted down the ages, as seems to happen with every church that's become official. Your father Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. He saw it and was glad. Now, that's interesting. Are you greater than Abraham? Well, Jesus says, I am. And this is the way he expresses it. He says that Abraham looked forward to seeing me. In other words, Abraham would have bowed in adoration at me. He looked forward to the culmination of all that he represented in terms of faith in God. And that culmination is in me. And if Abraham looked forward to seeing me, then that's because he too would be worshipping me, glorifying me, and submitting himself and pointing out that he is not of the same caliber or nature as I am. That's an amazing thing to say. I mean, it's quite astonishing. Abraham, the patriarch, the beginner, the father of the entire nation, and yet one stands before you who is greater than he. That's the impact of what Jesus is saying here. The people here are naturally scandalized, and besides which they take his spiritual words in a classically literal and earthly way again. Abraham was overjoyed to see my day, and indeed he saw it and was glad. The implication here is that there's a connection between Abraham and Jesus which these people are unaware of. And this connection is one where Abraham, at least through faith if nothing else, saw the days of Jesus coming, the coming of the Messiah, and would be overjoyed at the prospect of here is the man, the one who would save his people from their sins. Abraham looked forward to that day. Yet they understand that in a crassly literal way. He said, "You're not yet 50 years old." Well, Jesus was about 30. We understand that to be. "You're not yet 50 years old," the Jews said to him, "and you've seen Abraham?" Rubbish is the kind of comment that would come out of that. You couldn't possibly have seen Abraham. You couldn't possibly know what Abraham would think. And there they get that wrong, because of what John said right at the beginning, the foundational text. In the beginning was the Word. Before even Abraham existed, the Word was with God. Even before Abraham existed, the Word was God. That text interprets everything that we are seeing in John's Gospel. It's the key. It's the keystone that unlocks every single lock here. So, you are not 50 years old. Have you seen Abraham? The answer to that, of course, from Jesus' point of view, is yes, I have, because I've been in existence well before my 50 years or 30 years here. Something which is incredible to them to believe and would be indeed to us. But Jesus answers them in a way which is probably the most scandalous thing he has yet said. It's almost as if he goes out of his way to provoke a response from these people. So, have you seen Abraham? He says, I tell you the truth. This strong asseveration here, this strong testimony that I'm not telling you something which is false or just flimsy. I tell you the truth. Depend upon it. Here's what I have to say. Jesus answered, before Abraham was born, I am. Now that phrase, I am, is the very name of Jehovah, which they wouldn't even take upon their own lips. The very statement of the word Jehovah, Yahweh, I am, is something which was almost taboo at this day and age. It's a bit like drawings of Muhammad, taboo amongst Islamic folk. Here, amongst the Jewish folk, they didn't even write the word Yahweh properly in their Hebrew writings. They left out the point so it couldn't be properly pronounced. That's how they regarded this word as a very sacred name. It's the name that God revealed himself as a personal name to Abraham when he was met, or is it Moses, met in the burning bush. Who is it that I say who you are? What is your name? In that encounter with that patriarch, and God said, I am who I am. That's an amazing statement. There's the quality of that statement, I am, this ontology of God, the beingness of God. The fundamental principle of God is, I am the self-existent being. I am the one who exists, about which everything revolves around its existence. I am who I am. I am being of being, the nature of being itself. I am existence itself. I am here and have always been here. I am the very nature of existence, and without me there would be no existence of anything. I am the only one who is self-existent, because all other things are creations. They are created things. But I am means that I have my own being, which has been brought not into being by some creative act, but has always been. The centre point of existence lies within me. And that's a fundamental and very deep idea of what God is. The ground of our being is how one commentator put it. The ground of our being, the very nature of God. And not just the ground of our being, but the ground of the all being, of the nature of being itself. I am the one that defines what being is, what being alive, what being in existence means. That's what this I am who I am is. And Jesus takes these sacred words and vowels upon his own lips and refers them to himself. Did Abraham see you? Were you in existence at the time of Abraham? Impossible, you're less than 50 years old. Jesus' response, before Abraham was born, I am. I share that characteristic. I am basically declaring myself by using the words that are attributed only to God alone. Although it's a startling and powerful statement of who Jesus Christ sees himself to be, it's no more than a reiteration of that same verse that we come back to time and time again, which runs like a scarlet thread throughout this entire gospel. In the beginning was the Word, Jesus, and the Word was with God, the Father and the Son, and the Word was God. Uniqueness of identity, of purpose, which shows itself in the way in which Jesus sees himself. We need to make no mistake about this, and we cannot make any mistake about it. No matter, as I say, what you think of Jesus Christ, what he thought of himself was that he was equivalent to God. He made it clear. He made it plain to the point of being blasphemous about it. For anyone else, those words would be blasphemous, that I am God, worship me. Jesus makes that claim for himself and certainly sees himself as being the same as God. That's why he uses the term Son of God, which no one else had ever used before. At this, the response is obvious. At this, they pick up stones to stone him. Why? He's committed the ultimate blasphemy, claiming himself to be God. A huge stumbling block to almost anyone who would live at that time. It would be almost impossible to follow this person, Jesus, unless you submitted totally to his claim to be God or the equivalent of God. It's a remarkable thing. No one spoke like this man ever spoke. And they picked up stones to stone him, but Jesus eluded them. He took evasive action. He slipped away into the crowd and was gone, and away from the temple grounds, leaving these voices and these ideas echoing amongst them, that here stands one amongst you who claims to be God.